in this tutorial we are going to start our Hangman game. Now, in all the previous tutorials we learned about everything that we need to know to build this game. So that being said, let's go ahead and prototype all the functions that we know we're going to need. So one of the functions that we're going to need is to get a word from a word bank and return it. So meaning basically we need a function that opens a file, looks inside the file, and grabs a word, and then uses that as the word that we're going to try to use, and uses that as the word that we're going to use for our Hangman game. So to do that, we're just going to call a function with the return type as string. We'll just call it get word, and we won't give it any parameters because that's just going to do its own thing, go inside a word bank and get us a word. And since that's working with files, let's go ahead and include the library that we're going to need for that function, which is include fstream for file stream. Okay, now that we have that, we're also going to want a function that prints the board that we're going to need. And when I say board, I mean the man. So we're going to want a function that prints out kind of a representation of how many lives that the user has left. And to do that, we're just going to call it void return type because it's not going to return anything. It's just going to print out on screen something. And we're just going to call it print board. And this is going to take an integer value, and that integer value is basically just going to be the amount of lives that we have left, because depending on the amount of lives that the user has left, it's going to depend how much of the man is drawn. So that's what that parameter is all about. And speaking of printing our board, we also need a function that prints blanks. Prints the amount of blanks for the word that gets returned. And so to do that, we're just going to call a function that also, since all it does is printing something, it's just going to be void return type. We'll just call it print blanks. And we're going to give that function 2 arguments, and they're both going to be of type string, because the first parameter is going to be the word that we get returned here, and the second parameter is going to be the letters that the user has already guessed, and that's how it's going to determine what blanks to print and what letters to print. And we'll go over all this in the as we go through these tutorials. You'll see exactly how it's going to work. Okay, and let's go ahead and make another function that generates a random number, because we're going to use the random number that we generate to actually decide what word to grab out of our word bank. And we already did a random number generator tutorial, as you know, so this should be fairly familiar to you. We'll just call it generate random number and semicolon. So these are our prototypes that we're going to use. If I remember a function that we might need, or if we decide we want to create another function, we will. But for now, these are all the ones that I can think of off the top of my head that we're going to need. So that being said, let's go ahead and set up these functions. So we'll say, string get word, and set up our brackets. And then we'll set up a void print board. And we'll call it lives for the parameter. Void print blanks, and that's going to take 2 parameters. First one, we'll just call it chosen word, and the second one we will call letters guessed. And you'll see exactly why we're calling them that later. And the last one was our random number generator. And that one didn't take any parameters. So there we go. So this is the basic skeleton. Now I also want to go ahead and add some stuff to our main function while we're here. And the way our main function is going to work, we're going to go ahead and initialize our user lives. We'll call it user lives to 7. And then basically we're going to say while user lives is greater than 0, we want to do this, anything inside this loop. And basically this loop is just going to allow the user to keep guessing letters as long as the lives are greater than 0. And then we'll set a break statement in there somewhere if the word gets guessed correctly. Then we'll do that. So, but that's how we're going to set up our main for now, and we'll add more stuff later. And the other thing that I want to go ahead and do is, since it's kind of fresh in our mind, is go ahead and make our random number generator while we're in this tutorial. And to do that, all we do is say, string, or my bad, I had the get word on my mind. But the random number generator, we just have to include 2 libraries, if you remember. One was standard library.h, and the other one was time.h. So there we go. Those are the 2 libraries we need. Now let's go ahead and make our random number generator. We're just going to say srand time null, and remember this was the function that we need according to c++.com and the reference that we used. And then we're going to say we're pretty much just going to say return, and there's 2 ways to do this. You could say return rand percent, and then I don't know how many words we're going to have in our word bank. We'll just say we're going to have 10 for now, 10 plus 1, and this right here will return an integer value, a random integer value right here if we do that. So that's what we'll do there, and we might have to come back later and change it. In fact, just to avoid the confusion, what we're going to do is say random number equals rand. We need to make this integer. Int random number equals rand modulo operator 10 plus 1, and we'll say return random number. There we go. And if you see, if we go up here and we let me just comment this out real quick. Actually, I can't do that. Sorry. This is another way to comment, by the way, is with the star backslash, just like that. That's a new way of doing it, just to kind of explain that. So let's go ahead and test our random number. We'll say return generate random number, and just make sure it's giving us a random number. And it's not. Let's see what's reference generate random number. Generate random number. Just gonna make sure everything's right. Oh, there we go. We called it random number generator. Y'all were probably screaming at me whenever I called it that. So we called it generate random number. There we go. And it says process return 3. And let's run it one more time. Process return 3. It's just coincidence. There we go. Process return 9. So we're getting a random number every time. And while we're in this tutorial, I want to go ahead and I want to make us a word bank. And go back. I think I'm actually in this one. And we have employees.txt. Let me delete that real quick. There we go. And let's just make us a new document, text document. We'll just call it wordlist.txt. We're going to open it. word list.txt. There we go. Open, and we'll just say, give it a header. Word list. We'll give it a couple of words. So we'll say giraffe, rhino, Ruby, truck, cricket, grasshopper, buzzard. Just thinking of random, words off the top of my head. There's not really a theme going on here. Let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So let's get 2 more. We'll just say potato and one really good word. We'll say Linux. There we go. So that's 10 words. Not really a overall theme there, but it's the 10 words we'll use for our word bank for now. And let's go ahead and, in this tutorial, go ahead and make our get word function, since file input and file output's kind of a thing we've been practicing for a while, so it'll go kind of quick. So we need to go ahead and make our variable, call it if stream. Let me format that a little bit better. If stream, we'll call it input file, and then wordlist.txt. And we'll know pretty much, since this is returning a string, we'll know, we'll say if not input file, we'll print out an error, but we won't return, because this is a string return type, so we won't actually be able to return an integer value here anyways. But we'll say error -6, word list not found. That will let us know at least if the word list wasn't found. And then we'll say let's go ahead and make another variable here. We'll call it temp word, and then we'll just say probably gonna need temp word. There we go. And actually we're gonna need an array, so we'll say a string array. We'll call it word list, or we'll just call it word list. And let's go ahead and make a constant value. Constant word list size equals 10. And you can put a comment here in the code to let you know, change word list size here, just to let yourself know later, if you make a bigger word bank, if you want to change it to 100, all you have to do is add 100 right there. We'll say word list size equals, we'll just initialize the whole thing to blank strings. And then since we're going to need a for loop, we'll use this index variable. We'll set it to 0, because we're going to use a for loop later in this function. And so that's what we're going to go ahead and do now. We're going to do a pre-read. And we do have a header, so don't forget about the header that we need to get rid of. We're going to use our ignore function. So we'll say input file dot ignore our 255 bytes, and then our delimiter of new line. That'll get rid of the header, remember. And then we'll do a pre-read. Comment it there just for habit. We'll say input file temp word, and then our while loop, and we'll say while not input file dot eof. Go ahead and make a post read. It's the same thing, remember, as the pre-read. Input file temp word. And then we're going to store everything that we get from this file into a word list, our word list. And to do that, we basically just say, we're going to use our index variable that we created up here. We'll just say word list index, so it's going to start at 0, word list index 0 equals temp word, and then we'll say index ++. And then down here, once this loop is done, basically it's going to populate our entire word list array with all the words in this word list. So what we can do is, since we need to return a string value, but it needs to be a random string from our word list, we're going to use our random number generator, our generate random number function, to return a random index of this array and return a random word. And to do that, all we do is say return word list, and then for our index, since it needs to be random, we'll say generate random number. That's our function, generate random number, semicolon, and it will return a random index of this word list, which is populated with these words. And just to kind of show you that, if we go up to our main function here, we were returning a random number before. We'll go ahead and put that back to return 0. We're just going to see out get word and make sure it works. And if we do that, we get the word blue. If we run it again, 1 second, let's save it. If we run it again, oops, we get the word truck. And now we get the word Linux. So you can see we're getting new words every single time. Ruby, all from our word list. Grasshopper. And that's how our Hangman game is going to function. You know, it's going to grab random words from this word list. So I've kind of already got the print board code already programmed, and the reason why I went ahead and did it is because you really don't want to sit here for 25 minutes and watch me code out all this, you know, nitty-gritty stuff that basically you can do on your own. All I'm doing is using my formatting tab operators, and I'm kind of drawing out with these, you know, standard characters this Hangman guy. And you can see as the lives, the way I did it, the way I programmed it was in this function, takes parameter of lives, and I use a switch case, and as the lives go down to 0, the man is fully drawn. But as the lives go up to 5, you know, the man isn't fully drawn. He's only halfway drawn, and when he has full lives, there's no man there at all. But basically, I mean, it's real easy code. You can draw it however you want. But for those of you who just want to use this, you know, I would say study it a little bit, but not too much, because it's pretty simple stuff. It's just you can customize it yourself. You know, you can make it bigger if you want or whatever. But this is the way that I usually do it, and I will provide this code for you in the resources tab of this lecture, so you can actually download this code and just copy and paste it into your program if you want, because like I said, typing it out is kind of a hassle, and but if you want to do it yourself, that's perfectly fine, so it's up to you. But what I do want to do in this tutorial is work on our print blanks function, and it's actually a pretty simple function. It's just going to print out the blanks and then the letters of each word that we use, and we're going to have to use quite a bit of our string functions that we discussed in a previous tutorial to get what we want out of this print blanks function. So to begin, all we're going to do is create a for loop, integer I equals 0, and then I is going to be less than the parameter chosen word, and all chosen word is going to be a word from our word list that was chosen by our, you know, our get word function with the generate random number generator, and whatever word is chosen, we're going to pass into this function as chosen word. And so we want I to be less than chosen word dot size. And remember, this was one of those string functions that we talked about in the previous tutorials. And then we'll just say I++ and open our for loop. And now inside this for loop, we want two things to happen. We want if if the chosen word, if the letter at index 0 of the chosen word, let's say the first letter of the chosen word is A, and A is in any of the indexes of letter guessed, then we want to print out A on screen. But if A is not in any of the indexes of letter guessed, then we want to print a blank. So to do that, we're going to use some more string functions, and we're going to say if, and we're going to use letters guessed dot find. Remember, this is a string function native to all the string data types or string objects, and we're going to find the letter of chosen word dot at I. And what this is saying, this function, it's going to seem really complicated at first, but these are all string functions that I kind of told you to study and earlier in this section. And all it's saying is we're going to get this string, this word, this list of letters, and we're going to look in it. We're going to find to see if this letter, if chosen word at I, that's just going to return a single letter. So if this is chosen word dot at 3, it's going to return the fourth letter of this chosen word. So if the chosen word was, buzzard, it would return, or let's say the chosen word was truck, then and index I was 3, it's going to return C, because 3 is actually goes 0, 1, 2, 3. So it's the fourth letter. It would return C. And all this is saying is find in letters guessed, find C. And if it's found, then it's going to return something other than -1. But if it's not found, it's going to return -1. So to kind of determine whether it was found or not, we just say letters guessed.find chosen word.at I not equal to -1, and that means it was found. As long as this operation doesn't return -1, then we know the letter was found somewhere in the function. And so this if statement is saying that the letter was found. And so all we do is see out chosen word.at I, and we'll add a space at the end of it just to give it some spacing. And that's just saying, output the letter of this word at a certain index. So really study that. And then the alternative, we'll just say else, because the alternative is that it was -1, which means it wasn't found at all. And if that's the case, we want to print out a blank, the space at the end, to give it some space. So, this is the alternative. This means that the letter wasn't found in letters guessed. So we're going to leave it blank. And that's all this is. This is all there is to this function. And if we can actually test it real quick. So we'll save this. Let's go up to our main function and let's test it. So we're going to say, here we go. Main function is up here. We'll go ahead and say string word equals get word, and we'll output word real quick at the top of the screen so that you know what the word is. But then I also want to run print blanks, and we're going to pass in word as the chosen word, and then let's just pass in some letters ourselves. We'll pass in RST, LNE. I think those are the most famous Wheel of Fortune letters. So these are the letters guessed that we're saying are guessed. And if we run this program, we should get no errors. And hold on, it stopped working. If we run this program, here we go. The word was Linux, and since N was one of our letters guessed, we get the letter N. Now you might see that L is capital L, and we have L here. That's something I need to fix, obviously. I think I have capital letters in my word list. So we're actually going to change that. I'll change that in between tutorials, because obviously that's a bug in our program, because we want all our words in our word list to be lowercase, because whenever we enter, lowercase l, that's not going to show up because that's a capital L, even though it should be there. And so let's go ahead and run it one more time just to show you. So truck, as you can see, the R was there because we have an R. The T wasn't because this is a capital T in truck. We have a lowercase t. So I will have to change that. Small bug. And there's a way to get around it. If you can check and basically say if it's capital letter or lowercase letter, count it anyways. Fill in the blank. But you would just have to add more code. And if you want to do that, then I challenge you to go ahead and do that. But that's the basic functionality of print blanks. And while we're here, we're going to go ahead and take out the comment of our while loop, and let's go ahead and add some basic stuff to it. So we'll say, since we have all our functions planned out and everything that we need, we can basically go ahead and add the rest of what we need to this loop. And all that is we'll basically say, print board. We'll pass in user lives, which is 7, and then we'll say let's give the user some instructions. We'll say cout, give it some new lines. And we'll say, oh, well, first of all, we want to tell them what letters have been guessed. So we'll say letters guessed. Let's actually create a string for that. We'll say string letters guessed equals, and we'll say cout letters guessed. There you go. So now they can see what letters have guessed. And then we'll say cout enter a letter. Oops, sorry guys. We'll say enter a letter. Then we'll use cn. We'll say string. We'll just call it guess. We'll say cn guess. There we go. And that right there will basically, so we're just telling them what they've guessed. We're printing out the board, which is going to start out as a clean board, no man hanging from it. No letters guessed. It'll say enter a letter. We'll enter the guess. And then the first thing we need to do is say letters guessed plus equals. Remember, that's just going to add the string to it. We'll add guess to it. So now letters guessed is going to have guess in it. And then we need to, well, first of all, we need to get our word. So that's another thing we need to add real quick. So let's say, we'll say string word equals get word. There we go. So now we have string word equals get word. And that's basically just going to return, remember, that's going to return a word from our word bank. And we're going to store it in Word. And then what we need to do is print blanks. And we actually want to do that before this. So we'll say print board. And then we'll say, let's give us a little bit of space. And we'll say print blanks. And we'll say word letters guessed. And that'll print out all blanks the first time. Letters guessed plus equals guess. And then basically, if we want to check and see if it was in it, so let's go back down to print blanks. Actually, I think we can actually do that in here. Yeah, there we go. And we could add that in if we want. But actually, let's just go ahead and do that up here. We're going to do that in the main function. But you could do it in either one. We'll say letters plus equals guess. We'll say if. word.find guess does not equal -1, continue. And basically this is just going to continue more into the loop, and then we'll say else, because this means that they got the guess right, and then it's automatically going to update it, and we'll say else lives minus minus, or I think we called it user lives minus minus. There we go. Now let's go ahead and run that and just make sure everything runs okay. So if you look at that, we got our 4 blanks printed out, our hanged man. It'll say enter a letter. Let's just enter in R. There we go, and it goes ahead and draws it. And if we enter in, let's say B, we don't get it. It draws another one. Let's say L. Now look, it adds it to our blank. E, there we go. E adds to our blank. U, B, and you can see the word was blue, but you know, obviously there's still some bugs because it's not letting us know when we win. And keep going, I think, until we can enter multiple letters. You know, process returns 0 because our lives went out. And we'll just fix a few minor things to make sure that, you know, if it's 0, it'll print out our full guy. But so that's pretty much what we wanted to go over in this tutorial. I want to go ahead and add one more thing that you haven't seen before, and that is at the end of each, before we continue in each of these statements, I want to add a line that says system CLS, which tells the console to clear, and it'll actually make our game look a lot better. So you'll see what I mean when we run it again. Let's go ahead and run it, and it'll say, so let's enter in G, and as you can see, it's not running down the screen anymore like it was the last time, and that's because when we clear the screen, it's reprinting it all in the same exact spot, so it looks like it's not going anywhere. And that's the kind of effect that we want. So that system CLS is something new, but something easy and something that you can use in all your applications. I just wanted to go ahead and show you that. So, well, I've kind of already typed up and fixed everything that we needed to fix. If you look at our word list.txt, you can see I changed everything to lowercase so that we don't have any conflicts with our user input and the word that is chosen. And what we really needed to add was, in order to decide whether the user has won or lost during each guess. And to do that, the first thing I had to do was declare a global variable called flag. Now, I'm not sure if we went over global and local variables, but all a global variable is a variable that is declared outside of all the functions. You can see, like, it's not in the main function. This variable is actually declared underneath all my prototypes. And what this does, it allows this variable to be used in all of my functions across the board. Now, this normally isn't, you know, recommended. You definitely don't want to do this with all your variables for privacy reasons, but in this case, it's going to work out perfectly for us. So I created a Boolean variable called flag. You can name it whatever you want. I just called it flag, and I declared it to false. For when the program first starts up, it's going to be declared false. And then, if we scroll down a little bit, in our while loop, you can see that I have the flag set to true right at the beginning of the while loop. And then I have a condition that says if flag equals true, break. So I kind of want to show you what this is doing. This is basically when this while loop starts, setting flag to true, and then after these functions run, if flag is still true, it's going to break from the while loop. And I want to show you where this flag would get changed, and that's in my print blanks function. So let's go down to print blanks, and I'll show you what happens. So in my print blanks function, all I did was I basically said that if this branch is executed, set flag to false. But if this branch never gets executed at all, flag is going to stay true because every time this for loop runs, it's going to be running this piece of code rather than this piece of code, which basically means that throughout the life cycle of this for loop, if one blank gets printed, then flag is going to be set to false, basically meaning that the puzzle has not yet been solved. Flag equals false, meaning the word has not been completed yet because there's still a blank. But let's say this for loop runs all the way through and not one blank gets printed, then flag will never get set to false. And if we go back up to our main function, flag never gets set to false, so flag is still true after print blanks. And it says if flag equals true, break. Well, at that point, if you break, you come out here outside the while loop, and I added these two conditional statements. And basically it says if user lives equals 0, then obviously you broke out of this function because user lives was 0. And if you recall, our while loop basically said while user lives is greater than 0, keep doing this. But if user lives equals 0, then break out of this function and come down here. And if you come down here after you break out of the function with user lives 0, then you're going to run this code, and it's going to say you lose, the word was, and it'll tell you the word. But if user lives is greater than 0, then obviously you broke out of this while loop in a different way, which was via the flag. So let's say user lives is at 3, flag is set to true, print blanks runs, no blanks were printed, basically meaning all the letters were guessed correctly, flag is still true, and you break out of this while loop. Well, then you're breaking out of this while loop while user lives is 3. And if user lives is 3, hence greater than 0, then this code is going to get ran instead of this code, and it's going to say you win. And that's basically the functionality of this code. It's actually rather simple because basically we just created one more variable, and we basically just, you have to think about it a little bit. You know, we came down here and we just set the flag to false if one blank got printed, basically. If a blank at all gets printed, then the flag is going to be false, and you'll never be able to break out of the while loop via the if statement that checks if flag is true. You won't be able to break out. And the only other way to break out is if lives is equal to 0, and if lives equals to 0, then you lose. And so that's how this works. And if we run it, I want to go ahead and show you our finished product. When we run it, we'll go ahead and so this first word, just because we have 10 words, and I've ran it a few times and I know what it is Linux. So, you know, let me get a couple of letters wrong. So it's starting to draw our man, you can see. But if we get it all the letters right, so we'll say I, N, U, X, and you can see it's telling us the letters that we've guessed, which is something I wanted to add in. And then it says you win, the word was Linux, process returns 0, and you can see that's how the game works. But let's run it again, and I think we actually got the same word. No, we didn't. So this is a different word, not Linux, because it picked a different word out of the word bank. And we're going to try to get it wrong. So we'll just guess random letters. You can see it's drawing our man. And one more. It says you lose, the word was truck. And that's the basic, functionality of this program. It's a basic hangman game, but we used literally, everything that we could in this course. And so everything that we learned we got to utilize for this program, and that's kind of why I picked this project for our end of the course final project. And so what I challenge you to do is kind of convert this program into something more advanced. Maybe use file output or something else that we learned in this course, to save high scores. Maybe use a word bank with 100 different words, and then use the file output to say,
each time you run it, to save your score to this file and then check what the high score is in that file and then print out what the high score is compared to your score, and keep updating that file every time you run it. I would recommend trying that and just really getting good at these beginner concepts, and run through these last few tutorials a few times so you can see how we use these functions, because when you take an advanced C++ course, you're going to have to really know all that stuff really well. But for now, thank you for watching, and thank you for being a part of this course. Goodbye.